Welcome back to Just Giants with Grunk.
Grunk! Oh, Grunk!
Welcome back to Just Giants with Grump and the Cranky Fan, your favorite Giants podcast. I am your host, the Football Grump. With me, as always, is Mike, the Cranky Fan, and we are back sadly after a Knicks loss. And I know you're real upset about it. I know you're not the only one. Plenty of people listening, I'm sure, had their eyes glued to the TV for the last couple weeks, watching the Knicks on an unbelievable run come to an end.
Well, it was a believable run. Bad weekend because my Gators got knocked out of baseball, but obviously the big story is our beloved Knicks. When you blow a game of epic proportions like game one, it is so difficult to come back. You lose home court advantage, you're in the whole thing. And the bottom line is, when you go down 3-1 in a series, I think only 9 teams have ever come back in basketball being down 3-1. And when you have 2 teams that are that close, it's very hard to beat that team 3 times in a row. And we screwed ourselves, and that's it. So, it was a fun run. It's been 25 years since the Knicks have been in the conference finals. It's great to see this. As exciting as this city is, like when the Giants made their Super Bowl run, or even when the Yankees were having their big runs in the 90s, the Knicks are different here. I mean, you could split Yankees-Mets probably in the city 60-40. Islanders-Rangers are, not completely one-sided in the whole area, but this is like 98-2 Knicks-Nets this town. And people closing down 7th Avenue after first round wins, I can only imagine what this town will be like if we ever win a championship. And now we're close. Now we're relevant. So now it's like, what do we do next? And why am I saying all this other than just getting this off my chest is I think there's something to the limitations of the Knicks I think we can apply to the Giants. And I wanted to have this conversation with you, Grump. A lot of my criticisms with this team fall for the head coach, Tom Thibodeau, a guy who, is very stubborn and is his process guy, and someone who doesn't make adjustments unless he is forced to, whether there's a ton of injuries or coming on elimination or anything like that. And it makes me, think, can this team win a championship with him? And, is he a coach where the process will lead to a championship? Does he have good process? Or is it just the fact that, well, if we have enough talent, we'll win regardless? And that made me kind of think of Brian Daboll a little bit. And I wanted to have a discussion with you about Brian Daboll as we're getting into a pivotal year from him. A lot of people think he was on the hot seat last year, survived going in. And, as we assess Brian Daboll and what he is as a head coach, the things that he does, his process make him a good enough coach? Or was he simply coach of the year a couple of years back because, well, we just happen to win a lot of games? And do you trust a Brian Daboll for as being a really good coach to take us to that next level? Someone that can take us from, someone who got us into the playoffs, but maybe just because the sub situation, to a rebuild, to respectability, to playoff bound, to championship bound. And based on the things that he does, do you think he's that coach? This is not a referendum on should we fire him today or tomorrow, but we have enough sample size to get a real opinion on Brian Daboll. And what do we think of him does he have the right process to, grease the skids for this team to get better?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There are real concerns with Brian Daboll, especially for me. And I think that some of the things he did in that Coach of the year of 2022, he kind of got away from a little bit. Like, he really made people earn their spots on the roster. Remember, like, Darius Slayton didn't have a starting spot until like week 3 or 4 or something like that. Like, it took a while. This is a guy who led the team in receiving yards.
Mm-hmm.
but he did other stuff that he continues to do that I still think is questionable, like just spending an inordinate amount of time in training camp, moving guys around on the offensive line. I'm interested to see how much that changes this year. You know what I mean? I guess like one of the positives I would say about Brian Daboll is that I don't think that there's too rigid of a process. Maybe less so than Joe Shane, but it does feel like a little bit like each time there's a small adjustment in what he does. Each year there is some looking back and adjusting to what didn't work. I think that that's at least an indicator that we're not stuck in a process and this is how it goes and this is the way it works and this is how I win and whatever. So there is that, but there's definitely questions, and it's interesting because I was kind of having this conversation over the weekend. It's interesting how much that first year buys credibility. You know what I mean? Like if that year doesn't happen, he's gone. I mean,
Absolutely.
I don't think they get to survive to pick their quarterback. But I mean, there's a ton of other things in there. Like I just don't. I don't think that they re-sign Daniel Jones if that first year is no good. And from there, I don't know where the trajectory of where this team goes in terms of quarterback. So I have no way to predict how that would work out. So it's very, very silly to like waste a lot of time. Like, well, if they didn't win a lot in that first year, it's too bad. They did. And because they did, they made probably their most grievous error, which was, they got shackled to Daniel Jones, who immediately got hurt. You know what I mean? Like, and that you don't want to find one thing that torpedoes the years afterwards, but it was probably the biggest detractor to both of the last two seasons was the performance of Daniel Jones. Was it the only thing? Absolutely not. This roster's not good. They had a bad offseason 2023. It didn't pan out. You know what I mean? Or things that you thought were going to be immediate helps were not. They screwed around too much with
roster issues like during the game. Like we lost a Washington game last year because we both felt the roster was mismanaged for not dealing with a kicker.
I mean, there's all kinds of other things. I mean, the always being up against the ceiling of the cap, which I know they inherited a bad cap situation, but 2024 is now a couple of years removed from what you've inherited, and you've got guys like Nick McLeod earning escalators because of their playing time, and then you're telling them to take the pay cut. You're telling them, I know you've earned this, but I'm going to take it away from you, or you can kick rocks. And so Nick McLeod kicks rocks, and he leaves. He leaves the team. They get rid of him. You have things like Adoree Jackson not being approached just ignoring the entire cornerback position across from Deontay Banks until it's too late, and you have to come crawling back to Adoree Jackson. So I mean, there are things other than Brian Daboll there. There are things other than Daniel Jones there that screwed up the last two seasons. But it is kind of difficult. So basically, the conversation that we were having was, and not you and me and somebody else, was when you look around the league of what you consider a good coach, all of them had success in their first 3 years. Most of them had success in their second year. And not only that, they didn't just have success, it became prolonged from there. So you go around the league to Kevin O'Connell, to Kevin Stefanski, to Sean McVay, to what's his face in San Francisco. It doesn't matter where you go. All of the guys that stuck around had success in their first 3 seasons, most of them their second season. Shanahan was actually one that was his third season. Dan Quinn, his first season. Now, what we noticed is that a lot of these people, they all made their quarterback choices within those first 3 years. The Giants arguably did or did not. They were kind of pushed into a situation where they had,
They created a hostage video for choosing their quarterback. They were kind of held at gunpoint where you kind of had to resign him. So it wasn't a free will choice to Daniel Jones. They had to, basically.
But I mean, all of those things kind of go into the answer of your question. On the one hand, you know what I mean. There are mistakes other than roster mistakes. There are mistakes other than the quarterback. You know, there are questions I have about this coach. But I think ultimately, winning those games in 2022 with the talent that they had was not a fluke. You know what I mean? So,
And,
and I
and that's
think
where I
that,
go.
yeah, I still think there's a pathway for Brian Daboll to be a success, but it would be silly not to be worried.
Yeah, I think, and this is a situation I think we can go back to the Knicks and I can go even to Florida with my Gators, where it's hard to judge a coach when he doesn't have talent. It's like, it's the can you squeeze water from a rock? That almost makes you like a miracle worker. But the question is, you know, once you have your water, what do you do with it? See, I think a lot of things that, when you're a bad team or you're a mediocre team, you're playing a lot of closer games and, talent wins in most of the time. And I think that there are coaches like Tom Thibodeau at the Knicks where he's great from bringing a team from, point A to point B. But if I win a championship, I need to get to point C, and he may not be that good. Where we don't know about a guy like Brian Daboll, where is he a good coach to go to A to B? But when you go from B to C, is he that coach? And that's what I'm wondering, is that the roster is getting better. It may not be, elite championship level yet, but this roster is better than the roster they inherited 3 years ago. And, can you be a good coach with good talent? Because sometimes your decision making is a little easier because you have good talent. You don't have to be as maybe risky as you want to be or take chances if you want to be. You can just kind of coach and do your thing. So that's kind of the thing. That's why I still want to hold a little judgment on Daboll, because I think when you don't have the talent, it's hard to say, well, he sucks and didn't win. And I get your point about the 3 years. I just think that, the combination of the roster having to be rebuilt, from a high level talent from starters, getting depth, getting the quarterback situation figured out, it's going to take longer than we all wanted and hoped. I think we're finally turning that corner now. So I'm going to kind of hold off my final answer on Daboll at this point until I see with some talent.
It's hard not to think of Joe Shane and Brian Daboll as a package deal, but
Very true.
I think that Brian Daboll has a lot on his shoulders this year. And I've the more I've thought about it, the more I've adjusted my thinking. Jackson Dart is going to play at some point this year, and I feel I'm putting that in pen. You know, as we start to make our transition to pens and pencils here, I'm putting that in pen now. Whereas I think I had that more in pencil before, and I think I'm realizing a couple things is that this schedule is so fucking hard this year, on paper, at least the way it looks right now. And of course, my answer is based on right now, June 2nd. This
Mm-hmm.
schedule is just so hard. They're going to be out of the playoff run, pretty early. It really looks that way. I don't want to say stuff like that, but it looks like a really tough sled. And if that's the case, it's hard to justify not playing Jackson Dart from an ownership standpoint. Maybe not from like when you're right there with him and you see him every day and you're working with him, it's easy to be like, yeah, I know we're losing, but he ain't ready. Trust me, it's not good to put him out there. From a coaching standpoint, there's arguments you can make, but from an ownership standpoint, it's hard not to be like, listen, pal, you're supposed to be the QB guru. We're losing again.
It,
Show me you being a QB guru for like 5 minutes so that I know that
it,
we're on the right track. It's hard not to say that might not happen, right?
and let's look at it this way too. Jackson Dart is not Anthony Richardson, a guy who started 12 games in his college career and was a real raw talent where they needed time to develop him. Jackson Dart has played a lot of college ball. I understand that there's no need to start him right away and he has to get acclimated to the NFL, but in all honesty, I mean, for a guy we're drafting that high who's had a lot of college experience, if we're getting to a point where we're around week 10, 11, 12, and he's had almost a year in a NFL pro setting, he should be ready to go out there and at least be able to function. He may not have 100% command of the offense, but he's not a project in the way some of these guys of Trey Lance was coming out, or again, an Anthony Richardson type. He's pretty polished in college.
I know we get to the hypercritical portion of draft prep, and you start to look at all the things, and I understand that offense has you only reading a certain way, and you don't really have levels deep, and whatever. Fine, he still has like 4 years of SEC experience. You know what I mean? Like, that is not, while that development that we're all talking about needs to happen for him to be a successful NFL quarterback, he is going to look better than Tommy DeVito out there by week 10. You know what I mean? Like, he's a pretty polished quarterback. You know what I mean?
I would say by talent level alone, he should look better than Tommy DeVito almost immediately.
Yeah.
He may not understand every intricacy of the offense, but if we're watching drills like this, and this is something we'll look at, me and you, and we go out to camp and we watch the one day, watching them taking drills, and you'll be like, all right, look at that guy and look at that guy. I guarantee you Dart looks better than DeVito does doing drills.
Oh, 100%. I have no doubt of that. But I mean, I feel better about Jackson Dart in year one than I did about Michael Penix in year one. So, I mean, there's that. Even though Michael Penix was drafted way higher, and I know he throws this pretty deep ball and all other stuff. I just mean in terms of what... Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I feel very comfortable about Jackson Dart and his ability to look at least the part in year one. But I think ultimately for his development, it makes sense to have him sit. He's just not going to be the best for him.
We're in a good situation where he doesn't have to play right away.
And I think the one other thing that's really important for Brian Daboll this year is we're seeing in OTAs. Well, I mean, this kind of bridges the topic. Number one, Brian Daboll is already giving some starter reps to Jackson Dart in OTAs. As far as I know, as much as OTAs are not super duper important, he's never done that in the past. They've always gone to Jones, always, except for whatever. I don't know.
Even last year, where
I think
it had to be on people's mind that Daniel Jones may not be the starter the entire year.
Yeah,
this whole benching him for. I'm sure that thought crossed their mind during that offseason. Like, we should probably have someone sorta, kinda ready. So yeah. And also all the time that Daboll is spending with Jackson Dart in OTAs too.
Right.
I mean, isn't that one of the theories that Kafka has been calling plays more because he's been spending more time with Jackson Dart, just kind of going through like footwork and everything with him, like really taking him under his wing?
Well, whether that's the theory or not, that's what I would want to happen. I want Brian Daboll to spend that extra time doing that rather than call plays. And for what it's worth, Brian Daboll giving up play calling would be an evolution for him as well. I think the fact that he did not call plays in his initial year here was not a fluke that the team performed better. I do think that as a younger head coach, it is asking a lot to call plays and run a team. And I know that some of the best younger coaches do that, but also they didn't trip up. You know what I mean? When they started, they had a rough first year, and then by the second year they had success, and then by the third year it was prolonged success, and so they're kind of going in an upward trajectory. Brian Daboll is on this Rocky Mountain up and down shit. Juggling all that while you're worrying about your job and worrying about the roster and being a head coach, it's too much. And you brought Mike Kafka here and you locked him in a closet so he couldn't get another job anywhere else for a reason. And when he was calling plays, he wasn't bad at it. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that he was better or worse than Brian Daboll. I think they're a little different in terms of their stuff. And I think also Mike Kafka was a little frustratingly long in his process in doing the flip-ups and the play calling. But regardless, it was his first time calling plays. So I do think that Mike Kafka has gotten better as a play caller. I think he understands the aim of Brian Daboll's offense, and I think he understands how aggressive Brian Daboll wants to be. I think that if Mike Kafka calls plays this year, and the offense looks like that's not the issue, and Brian Daboll doesn't snatch the play calling back midway through because they're not winning, I think that is a point in Brian Daboll's favor. I don't know how you feel about that.
I completely agree too. I think, part of being a good coach is having, a good support staff, good coaching that you trust, and let him. Being a head coach is such a hard job. You're thinking of 500 things at once, all, minute details and decision making and macro things also. And if, having your head buried in a playbook and a play sheet takes away from big picture responsibilities. And there are some savants out there that can do it, but for the majority, most coaches don't and can't. So, if he can let go and let Kafka do his thing, or the next OC, if Kafka gets a job somewhere else and he has that trust in that guy, I think it's better for him and better for the team.
Let's go into our season predictions here. So we ended at week 3 against the Kansas City Chiefs. I think I have the Giants going 2-1 with 2 surprise wins on the road against the Commanders and the Cowboys, and then a loss to the Kansas City Chiefs in week 3 at home. I think you have them at 1-2 with a win against the Commanders and a loss against the Cowboys and the Chiefs.
I have them at 1-2, but I'm not feeling horrible.
Okay.
I think at least I put that like a little sort of smiley face next to that 1-2 as opposed to 1-2.
A big frown. Yeah. Okay.
All
right. All right. So then let me know how you feel about week 4, Sunday, September 28th at home against the Los Angeles Chargers at 1 o'clock.
You know something? I think this is a schedule win for us. I think, Chargers coming across the country playing at 10 o'clock their time. I think this is where you kind of catch them. And to be very honest, I think some of these teams that are borderline really good may look at the team like the Giants as, exhale a tiny bit. I think that's kind of where we are in this schedule. I think this is going to be one of my surprise picks along with week 1 at Washington. I think I have the Giants a winner in pencil. Very faint pencil, but pencil.
That's interesting. So I have this as a loss, but I have a loss in pencil. I don't think there's any question that the Chargers are a more talented and a more developed team. They have really strong coaching.
What's your take on Justin Herbert overall?
I think that he's a dangerous quarterback, but I think that he's incredibly dangerous when you pair him with John Harbaugh.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think that he plays to Harbaugh's a lot of Harbaugh's strengths, and Harbaugh also he knows exactly what he wants to do in offense in terms of both running an offense and getting the talent, and he immediately started doing it as soon as he got there. So everything is working in Herbert's favor.
I think he's one of the point where he's like he's kind of overrated a little bit to the point now that he's underrated. Because now I think all the stars are aligned for him to be really successful with Harbaugh. And I think when coming out being, a high draft pick and being thrust on as being a star, maybe more than he actually was, I think people are like, well, what's the deal with this guy? And I think people kind of stop thinking him in the same kind of thinking the way they think of Trevor Lawrence, except Trevor Lawrence never got his Jim Harbaugh. Now we have a guy I think he's better than Trevor Lawrence too, but I think he can really have the second third of his career can really be good now because he has a quarterback like him in place.
Yeah, and I think another thing working that makes him a little bit underrated, he sort of has like an Eli Manning personality. Mm-hmm. Just seems a little bit more quiet, a little bit more reserved, just does his talking on the field. But regardless, I still think that there's a small amount of rebuilding going on here. Especially on defense and at wide receiver. There's not a lot at wide receiver. It's a talented secondary, I think. You have Cam Hart back there, Dante Jackson back there, Derwin James I really, really like back there. That's a pretty talented secondary. But, the front seven feels like it's, a lot of guys in their 30s. On offense, I think that wide receiver group is pretty thin. Vlad McConkey obviously is... the star name there. And then you have like a lot of like just mid talent with Trey Harris, Mike Williams, Quentin Johnston. I don't know, Darius Davis. Like, there's just not a lot of talent there. But at the same time, I just don't think that the Giants have the firepower to outduel Justin Herbert in a Harbaugh offense right now, unless the Giants are able to generate a consistent pass rush. But it would have to be against a very, very good offensive line. You have Joe Alton, Rashawn Slater, Zion Johnson is pretty good, Mekhi Becton on the inside, and Bozeman on the inside too. I find it hard to believe that they'll have a consistent pass rush that will disrupt the offense enough to win that game. That's kind of where I land on this game.
I also feel as we're getting into weeks 4, 5, and 6 this is about the time we're going to know what our ceiling is with Russell Wilson. I mean, we're talking about, okay, when is Jackson Dart going to take over? But we still have a season to play. And we want to how do we maximize this season as best as we can while with the eye to the future? And I think once we get to week 4, we're going to kind of know what we have with Russell Wilson, whether he still has something on his fastball left, or, he is in decline to the point of, he's if anything, or do we start really thinking about Jackson Dart at some point in the future? So I am going to kind of be optimistic that when we get to around week 4, we're gonna be thinking about Russell Wilson as, all right, he's not Patrick Mahomes, but he's also not Daniel Jones either. I think. And I think that's going to kind of color some of these picks for the next couple of weeks and even a game like this. But I think this is kind of the point in the sand where we're going to be like, this is kind of who we have this year with Russell Wilson.
Yeah, you're probably right. I would agree with that. By about week 4, I think the astute people will know what we've got, and I think by week 6, everybody else will figure it out.
Yeah.
Moving into week 5, Sunday, October 5th, the Giants are traveling to New Orleans to play the New Orleans Saints at 1 o'clock. They traditionally have a tough time there, but a lot of that was associated with Eli Manning being from there. I guess that was a more fun stat then, and his dad playing there. Give me your thoughts on the 2025 Giants traveling to New Orleans and playing the Saints.
I wish it was 2 weeks earlier when Florida was playing LSU, but the schedule gods never seem to give the cranky one any sort of break at all. If we were better and more consistent, I think I would have this one as a win in, I think, Penn. I think this New Orleans team's going to stink. A game we should win. I just kind of thinking of the flow of this season and, the inconsistencies we're going to have. This seems like a lay an egg game to me going out there. And I know it's got what happened 7 years ago with Eli Manning has absolutely nothing to do with this team or this roster or the cost of tea in China, but you just go there and just weird things happen. And I feel a loss in this. So I'm going to put this as a loss in pencil.
I put this as a win in Penn. And the reason why is because if the Giants have any hope of keeping their coaching staff and their front office together, they need to win this game. I mean, that's it. It really comes down to that. I want them to at least be on the right track, and that involves keeping people in place. But I know it's on the road in the Dome and all that, but I don't even know what New Orleans is going to do this year while they sort their franchise out. I mean, they've been kicking the can down the road with the cap for like 2 decades now, and now they're really at a tough spot because they made the move to David Carr. He's got to retire. They weren't ready for that. I mean, it's pretty clear. And getting Tyler Show is a total shot in the dark. He's an older rookie with limited film and experience and a lengthy injury history already. I mean, the offensive line is slowly coming together, sure, but I think the skill positions are starting to get old. Alvin Kamara is not young anymore. Brandon Cooks is certainly not young anymore. You got pretty much, Olave and Rashid Shaheed. It's not really like a ton for a rookie quarterback to work with here.
There's a case this could be the worst team in the league.
100%. This could easily be the worst team in the league. I mean, defensively, this team feels old. Cameron Jordan is like 35.
I think he played with Michael Jordan. He's that old. Yeah.
There's some talent in the secondary, but I don't think. Again, it's still like Tyrann Mathieu been around for quite a while now.
Hmm.
And I think even if the talent is in the secondary, like I think at this point the Giants would probably be able to just win on a strong running game and just pounding away on defense against an offense that I don't know really what their plan is going to be. Now, this is also one of those things where we say this in June, and the Saints may get off to like a running start. Who the hell knows? You know what I mean? Maybe
Hmm.
Tyler Show is perfect for what they're doing down there. I don't know.
And they also may look at this as, something we need to play for our coach for this, and oh, we're playing the Giants. So too, when teams look at bad teams on their roster, they
That's
kind of think
yeah,
weird things.
that's actually a great point. I mean, everyone's a fan of a mid-level team or a bad team they're hoping is mid-level, and they look at the schedule and they try to circle the possible wins. That's exactly what the bad team is doing too. Fans of the Saints are circling Week 5 as like this is a win in pen.
There's two schmucks on the Just Saints podcast right now. They're putting this game as a win in pen. I can guarantee it.
Simply Saints. All right, so that puts us both. Oh
Well,
no, you have this as a loss. So that puts you at 2-3.
yes, I do.
Okay, so I have us at 3-2 now. Go ahead. What were you saying?
Just one last thing before we move on to this. You're saying this is a game where they're going to be, they're going to want to win because they would want to keep their coach. Do you have any sense that this roster is still all in on Daboll, or could take him or leave him?
I mean, I didn't say that. I
I thought
didn't.
you said
I didn't. I just said, yeah. I mean, the Giants, the organization, not the Giants, the players. But if they
okay.
have any, yeah. I mean, me as like a fan is the same as me as an owner, I guess. Basically, right? Like you
Mm-mm.
look at everything through. You should be. I mean, I guess you look at everything through the same lens. Like, what would I do if I had complete control of this team, right? And
Right.
honestly, if you think that you're further along than you are, you don't want to blow the whole thing up. You want to know that you actually do have the right GM and head coach in place. Even if you disagree with this decision that happened and that decision that happened, you want to think that you're further along. And so for me, the fan, I want them to keep them there, and the only way I see them staying there is if they win this game. If they lose this game, I don't know, this is kind of what I would have said about the Panthers game in Germany last year.
Mm-hmm.
Because the
I see.
Panthers were terrible. They needed to win that game or all hell was going to break loose, and all hell broke loose. As soon as they lost that game, Daniel Jones was fucking out of here. And then it became a question of like, well, who else is gone? Shane Bowen
Yeah.
going to survive? Is Daboll going to survive? I mean, that really was a pivotal game where it's like that's the worst team that you're going to play. It certainly looked like it at the beginning, and it stayed true the whole year up until they played them, and they still lost.
Yeah, but I also think though there was a break the glass plan that they were going to do anyway. The question was, when do we break the glass and actually do it?
I
Where I don't
agreed.
where I don't know if there's we're getting rid of the coach and it's a question of this game is going to do it. I
No, no, no,
really
no.
think I really, really think that the decision to move on from either just Daboll or Daboll and Shane is going to be at the end of the year an aggregate decision of how the whole season went. That's my gut feeling. Right?
Of
And I could be
course.
completely wrong.
Again, I don't mean it that black and white. Like if they win this game, they stay. They lose this game, they're out. I'm just saying like this game is probably the best indicator of whether they stay or go. If they can't win their easiest game, that is real trouble signs for them staying here. That's what I'm saying. I don't mean it
Hmm.
super black and white like that. Um,
That's fair.
yeah. Um, Moving forward, just a couple of days to October 9th, the Giants will be hosting the Philadelphia Eagles, the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles, for Week 6, a Thursday night matchup at MetLife Stadium. How do you feel about this game, Cranky Fan?
I'm trying to think of which train I will be on heading home after that. Will I be on the 950 or the 1010? That's how much of a loss in pen this appears to be to me. You know, having a road game on a Sunday followed by the short week, and it does get blunted a little bit by it is a division team, so you're not, you have familiarity with them, but if Philly is going to be one of the best teams in the league and we're coming on short rest and they own us anyway, I really, really don't see how that's possible.
It's interesting that you're not wrong. I understand what you're saying when saying it's blunted, that you don't have to do as much game prep because they're a division rival and you play them every year, twice a year. But
Yeah,
at the same time, the impact of this game is double because it's a division game. So
Sure.
I can't stand the fucking Thursday game. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to talk about a Thursday night matchup without bitching about it, because I just like, you do this shit, you make it a division game, you've made it super important, and now you've got teams traveling. And I get it, New Orleans is not China, but
It's disrupting your normal
exactly, and you've put more weight on the
routine.
game. It's just so silly to me. And there's already rumors that the league is going to make a 4-team division in fucking Europe. And they can't even get this shit right. They can't even get the Thursday game right, let alone the London and Germany games right. They think they're going to do a conference over there, but
That's never going to happen in our lifetime.
I
First of
certainly
all,
hope so. I really do. I
first of
hope it never happens.
first of all, the thought of expanding by 4 teams, it seems crazy anyway.
Yes.
I
Agreed.
mean, just forget about where those teams are located. I don't see it, and just the logistics nightmares and the scheduling, and it'll never happen.
I really hope it doesn't.
I think they've maximized their revenue and exposure by having these, bowl games, glorified bowl games out there. They a tremendous amount of attention. You get that tremendous amount of attention because it is like once a year in Germany, and the couple of games in London and wherever. I think there's just a lot of diminishing returns by going out there and all the nightmare logistics involved. I don't ever see it happening.
I couldn't agree more. In any event, this game, Giants Eagles. Forget even the Thursday thing. This could be Sunday. This could be with 3 bye weeks beforehand. I don't see that. This is a loss in pen. The Eagles' defensive line and the pass rush has taken a pretty decent hit so far this year. But they remain a really strong roster. Let's not even play silly about it. They're strong. They've had some consistent coaching. There's consistency along the trenches on both sides of the ball. They're staying pretty young. On the flip side, the Giants are still figuring a lot of stuff out with the roster and everything. So, I mean, I could possibly feel better about this if it's a Sunday afternoon, but on paper, I'm not going to like this matchup until, A, the Giants have another, assuming, we assume that the last 2 off seasons have been good, another strong off season in a row, 3 in a row, and B, until I actually see them beat them. You know what I mean? Why should I ever sketch this as a win if I don't feel strongly about the roster and I've never seen them do it?
And the other thing I have in my notes here is I think Nick Sirianni is a lesson for Giant fans too, about as we're kind of evaluating this coaching staff and everything, don't take it every week to a state of the Giants, breakdown and if they're staying or going. Because if you remember, around this time last year, we in week 5 or so, I think we even were like, is Sirianni going to make it the next couple of weeks? Is he going to get fired? And he won a Super Bowl and just got a nice hefty extension. So again, I'm going to kind of have everybody, when looking at our own situation, don't every week feel the need to kind of go through the pros and cons of keeping Daboll versus firing him. Like, let the season play out before we do that, because it's going to get exhausting, and it has to be seen in aggregate again. I think he's something to look at as an example. And I get it. Sirianni won, he'd won already. They were successful as it was. But like I said, we definitely had conversations about, is he going to make it through, next week or the week after?
We did. It's funny. I didn't watch it. I only heard the clip. So don't judge me if this was taken out of context and whatever. It's not my fault. But Nick Wright was responding to a thing where Saquon Barkley allegedly said something along the lines of the 2024 Eagles were a top 5 Super Bowl team of all time. Saquon Barkley has spent far too much time on a very shitty Giants team to even be able to speak about such matters. We were 100% talking about whether or not Nick Sirianni was going to be the head coach next year early on in the season. I was watching an Eagles game with an Eagles fan early in the season who was bitching that he wanted to strangle Nick Sirianni early on. Now, am I saying that that's right or wrong? No, but what I'm saying is that if you're a top 5 Super Bowl team of all time, that conversation never happens in that year. It might have happened the year
We
before, maybe it happens a couple years after, but it doesn't happen that year.
we have tons and tons of evidence and examples of teams that when it gets to December, gets on runs and become unbeaten. Not even a giant run where they just got hot and won games. I'm talking that Tampa Bay Buck team in 2001 that got scorching hot in December and January. They weren't, world beaters the entire season. This happens where teams just they go on these runs late in the year and recency bias is like, oh, we're the best team since sliced bread ever. It's like, no, you got hot at the right time. So I think Saquon should probably watch some of those NFL films and study up on his history.
Yeah, I mean, like even the 2012, the Ravens, that Joe Flacco year, that was like that whole year was like an anomaly for Joe Flacco. But like that postseason, he was like some other player.
Yeah.
The Ravens were just like unstoppable that year, and it's funny because they won the Super Bowl, but they almost didn't. But you really wonder like if that Super Bowl would have been an absolute blowout if there wasn't a blackout in the middle of it.
Yeah, who knows?
In any event, that's going to do it for this episode. There is a media open OTA later this week on Thursday, so we will have more observation, more notes, and therefore more talking points come next Monday night. So your next Tuesday morning, we'll have an episode with weeks 7, 8, and 9 previewed along with OTA headlines, all available on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and of course, YouTube. So,
And where can they also find you?
I on Twitter at @football_grump, and I will be appearing later this month on the Giants Nation show with Bobby Skinner, Mr. Robert Pinskin himself. I believe we're doing the way too early 2026 draft preview. So that's fun for everybody.
That is way too early.
Yeah, we do it every year though. Yeah.
But I'll be listening. Yeah, for sure.
And anybody who's interested in hearing about Arch Manning, I'm sure you guys are ready to listen to that.
The second best quarterback in the SEC this year, and you can date stamp that right now, ladies and gentlemen.
You think he's second best, huh?
I don't think he's as good as DJ Lagway.
I don't either, but I don't know that there's enough.
Nussmeier.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's exactly what I was gonna say. I've seen so little of him. Nussmeier, I think it was probably better than him. But we'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where you can find us. That's where you can find me. And we will see you guys next Tuesday. Until then, go Giants.
Go Giants.